Welcome to Flourishing Unfiltered, the podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks.
We talk about the unseen journey of struggles on the path to success that people rarely talk about.
I'm Kieran Smith, positive psychology and leadership coach and consultant.
And I'm Dr. Michael Neuhaus, positive psychology and self-leadership speaker and consultant.
Before we begin today, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As we share our stories today, we honour the rich tradition of storytelling that has been passed down through generations.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Future of Flourishing, a futures thinking media, training and venture lab dedicated to bridging the gap between scientific knowledge and practical application in the field of human flourishing.
The Future of Flourishing is committed to creating a comprehensive ecosystem of communication and innovation platforms. Find out more about the Future of Flourishing at futureofflourishing.com.
If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. It would mean the world to us. All right, today's guest is Aaron Tait. Aaron joins us with an incredible breadth of experience. From war zones to slums, Aaron has worked across the globe as a military officer, humanitarian and social entrepreneur, and now writes to help people live deliberate lives filled with purpose. He's a best-selling author of Dream Team, Entrepreneurs That Change Lives and How to Be One, Edupreneur, and Live Deliberately. Aaron is the co-founder of the impact accelerator YGAP and co-founder of the K-12 education platform ec.inc, sold to the tech unicorn Go1 in 2022. And he's the co-founder of Microsoft's Imagine Cup Junior AI program. He is a graduate of the University of Cambridge and holds 3 master's degrees and is an innovation advisor for the leadership and strategy agency By Many.com.au. He lives in Byron, Australia with his wife Kaitlin and their 2 sons. Firstly, Aaron, how are you today?
Very well, Karen, and lovely to reconnect. And we've done some great work together, and also nice to meet you, Micah.
Yeah, you too, Aaron. Thanks for joining us. So exciting.
Absolutely. It is really exciting to reconnect with you, Aaron. And I know that working with you was one of my great passions. I learned a lot about leadership, but also creativity and innovation. I have so much to be thankful for in that space. And Aaron, you've got an incredible CV filled with a range of different experiences, some of which we'll hear in this conversation here. It's actually pretty difficult to sort of figure out where to start, but perhaps we'll maybe start with Education Changemakers, so ec.inc, which has now been acquired by Go1. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start that venture?
Yeah, I'm actually in Sydney today at Stone and Chalk, which is a co-working space. I haven't been in a co-working space for many years, but here I am today. But EC, Education Changemakers, was actually founded in a pub a couple of kilometres from here, literally on a napkin, on a bar napkin. Dave Faulkner and I were having a few drinks after TEDx Sydney. This is sort of 12, 13 years ago. And I had just returned from East Africa, and I was launching an organisation, a non-profit that would support local entrepreneurs in very, very challenging communities. And Dave Faulkner was a government employee in the Northern Territory, and he was taking this approach of finding great educators, up-and-coming teachers who could really transform some of the most challenging schools in Australia. So we said, well, you're in the government, I'm starting up as a social entrepreneur. Why don't we also do this thing in education where we find incredible teachers who, if we can get alongside them and give them a confidence and a license and some tools to go back and change their school, that might be a really effective approach. So we came up with a name at the pub. We decided that Dave would quit his job at the pub, and we went 50-50 as shareholders. We wanted to be a for-profit for good company, so we very quickly were exploring the B Corp world. And then more than a decade later, we sold that business, and lots of ups and downs along the way.
That is incredible. All good things happen at the pub, by the sounds of it.
That's it. Especially with a country boy like Dave Faulkner and an ex-Navy boy like me. So having a cold beer definitely got our brains working a bit.
Is that also the story behind the social impact accelerator YGAP.org, or can you tell us a little bit more about that story as well?
So my wife and I, her name is Kaitlin, we had worked in East Africa for a number of years as humanitarian workers. We were running a high school for disadvantaged young people and we're in Tanzania, and then we're running a community HIV/AIDS community project in Kenya. And we had gone to Africa, East Africa, ready to change the world. We had the Make Poverty History bracelets. We'd been to some Coldplay concerts. We were kind of fired up and ready to go. But learned over 2 years, really in the front lines of living in a slum was really the only way to explain it, or a township. And then a village. We learned that we were not the best bringers of the solutions to the problems of these places. We were finding these incredible local entrepreneurs, innovators, leaders, and we had this change in mindset that we wanted to back them and support them. So we were initially called Spark, and that idea was innovated on the floor of our studio apartment in Cambridge in England. Kaitlin and I are sitting cross-legged with a very cheap bottle of wine, saying, if we were to launch a nonprofit, what could it be? Is it possible? And it really became, can we find these incredible local entrepreneurs? So you see the link between the two organizations here. Yeah. And we said, let's turn down the job offers at the United Nations that we're getting. Let's turn down this sort of the wealth we might get working for these different companies, or prestige we might get, and let's just move back to Sydney with no money, no connections, no idea really, and get to work on the nonprofit. So wasn't in a bar, I was on the floor of our apartment. But I guess the humbling side of this is for the first 2 years of what became YGAP, I did work in a bar. I was a bartender. So with the 7 degrees that Kaitlin and I had between us and the years of experience, she was a nanny, I was a bartender, and we would work to pay the bills, but then we would spend every waking moment that was left on this nonprofit that we believed in.
Wow, how inspiring. And I love these stories, apart from the fact that they always seem to involve alcohol.
Yeah.
But and it's just incredible when you look at your CV. As Karen said in the beginning, you've built several businesses. Here you are now. You live in Byron Bay with your family. It just seems, all sunshine and rainbows, and you just write books now. You know what this podcast is about. To the outside, this looks absolutely amazing, but we want to know, have you struggled at any point on this journey? What were your struggles? This is what we would really like to understand, because probably, as you know, when you're starting out, or maybe also when you're still in the midst of it, it seems like the biggest struggle street. I mean, an awesome one, because hopefully it's all mission driven and based on passion and purpose, but nonetheless, it's filled with struggle. Can you tell us a little bit about your struggles along the journey? What was standing out to you?
Like I'm fine to be kind of go through financial humility again. Like I'm fine to be poor and be there again. I'm fine to be early stage and not impressive as a business or an organization. I kind of love that stage actually. I had this recurring thing across both the organizations, across the business that I started with Dave Faulkner and then the nonprofit that I started with my wife, Kaitlin, that I was always letting people down. So I would have this recurring dream where I was like forgetting that we had countries operating. So like entire teams of people in a country. I was forgetting about entire business structures that I had started, and like I was responsible for paying people's salaries, and I would wake up like in a cold sweat that I had forgotten things. To be honest, I was late to today's meeting because I was busy doing something and I forgot about our meeting. And it's like this thing that I'm letting people down. So I was always really worried that I was letting people down. And because I was doing quite a lot at the same time, I was building out a nonprofit at the same time that I was building a business, and I was literally crossing town. So the nonprofit was in Richmond in Melbourne and the business was in South Melbourne. And I would like have to Uber between them and like put on my hat of a completely different business and kind of feel worried that I just missed the morning and like what was happening. And so I felt like I was letting people down. I felt like I was letting my family down because I wasn't present with them. I was letting the nonprofit down because I was working at the business, and I was letting the business down when I was working at the nonprofit. And for years, I just felt like I was being pulled in too many directions, and everyone was kind of disappointed in me, that I just wasn't present enough. So now, like, I'm very, like, I'm quite humble about it all. Like, I'm a father first. That's like my number one priority. I'm an author. I'm a husband and a father first. I'm an author second, and then I'm doing some work here and there. But it's down the bottom at the moment because I just want to be so present for my kids for the next few years. That's my absolute number one priority, and I don't want them to feel that down. Kind of the issue I'm trying to solve the most.
And can I quickly ask, if you don't mind sharing, how old your kids are and sort of were they always there along that journey of you creating that nonprofit and the business?
No, my boys are 6 and 3.
Okay.
And I've been far more present for the younger one, Atlas. He was born during COVID, and that forced a lot of us to slow down. But I've been engaged in actually I've done a lot of work on myself in the last few years, and the biggest thing that's come out is missing out on my boys' childhoods. Yeah, and that's been a hard lesson. I'm trying to fix that.
And I do recall too, Aaron, like one of our conversations towards the end of our time working together. I remember you saying that that you only have X amount of summers, really, with your kids before they move out. And you've always inspired me in that space as someone that's very family orientated, and I know from the team in which we used to work with together, people often loved how grounded you were in trying to be that family person first, being there for your wife Kaitlin, but also your 2 boys as well, which I really love and find very inspirational too. And thank you so much already for sharing, the startup journey. And I know that you've got some incredible stories, and like if people haven't had a chance to read the books that you've published so far, it's worth a read because you do go into quite a lot of depth around some of the real struggles, and I'm going to say some situations that you'd prefer not to probably be in again. But there's some great things in there. But just to touch on the point that you've mentioned around maybe being a bit more present, when you're going through, because a lot of our listeners are probably in that startup phase or trying to navigate and figure out how do we balance life's commitments. Did you have any strategies that you used to sort of help you, either be a bit more present or, was there any sort of tools or tips that you can share with the listeners that help maybe guide your thinking in that space?
Just being fully in on whatever I was in was something I would always try to do. So if I was working with the business, I'd try to be fully on that, and I would shut down phones and Slack and email. And if I was running a workshop with a group of educators, for example, on the business side, I was like, how can I just be from 9 o'clock to 3 just fully on them and try not to let distractions come in. If I was in South Africa or Bangladesh working with a group of entrepreneurs, I was like, I am just here for you. This is going to be an 18-hour day, and at 10 p.m. I still care about your business and I want to hear from you about how it's going. And then I would bring that into my time with Kaitlin. I didn't have children at that time, but if I was on a date with Kaitlin, I was fully there for her, and it was phones off, not thinking about work, not talking about work, and nothing would interrupt that. So that was something I tried to do. Just I'm fully in with what's happening right now, to the detriment of, oh shit, I probably should have been doing something else, or I should have actually been in another meeting. Never had a PA, never kind of have gone down that angle, but maybe I needed one in a way of just like, hey, pull out of this, and you need to now direct your focus over here. So it's a kind of a blessing and a curse.
I would say too, it's probably been, maybe I'm a little bit biased having worked with you before, but I feel as though that's maybe part of what helped build such a great product as well at Education Changemakers, because I always remembered that was one of the things you for our listeners too. Aaron is the person that trained me up to be a facilitator, and one of the things that you did tell me was, when you're facilitating, you're there for the day, you're present for the day, and you're with those people for the day, for that journey. And I think that probably led to, probably more good sales, because, that notion of good work creates more good work. I don't know what your thoughts might be on that.
Yeah. The great leaders of the world, right? Bill Clinton had his flaws, but people always said about Bill Clinton, if he shook your hand and looked you in the eye, you felt like you were the only person there. So I think there's a power in that. And how I do that as a father, I just took an extended amount of time away with my family, and my son and I were just, Finn was sitting on a rock. It was his base that he had for like 10 days on this beach, his fort. And was sitting there, and he looks up and he's like, "Dad, we've just talked for so long." And I was like, "I know, I love it." And he's like, "I love it too." He's 6 and he's talking like this. And I was like, "Oh, what else do you want to talk about?" And he's like, "Oh, have you ever been scared?" And I was like, "Yes, of course I've been scared." And then bang, another hour of talking. And we recently debriefed like what was the best part of the holiday. And I think his number one was like eating ice cream in Italy, but the second one was like that chat I had with Dad. And I was like, I just was there for him for a few hours. And that meant a lot. He might remember that for the rest of his life. I certainly will.
Thank you. What a beautiful story. And Aaron, it makes so much sense, the whole idea of, being present fully and so forth. I think that's something many people strive for these days, and yet we live in this TikTok world, right, where our brain is just constantly hijacked. Has it just been a matter of making that decision to be fully present wherever you are with whomever you are, and then you were able to do that? Or were there any tips or, tricks you tried, some strategies that helped you with the presence?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Micah. It's like I feel like maybe we always talk about the things that we have to work on the most. So it's like this is something I've had to work on to be fully present. So there's all the things of like taking notifications off your phone and those kinds of things. But when I would go on holiday, I would be fully off. Like everyone knew, like Aaron, we don't even know where he is in the world. We're just not going to get through to him. I had a specific email that I would give to like 2 people. It's like if we're front page of the Australian, or like we're on Today Tonight, or my house is burnt down, like get in touch. But other than that, like I don't want to hear from any of you. So they're like tangible things I would do. If like if I was off, and everyone in our team always knew, like once Friday afternoon hit and we had kind of a routine and a practice about Friday afternoons that I think all the team really enjoyed, but we knew that we would not talk to each other until Monday morning, like never. And and if someone called you on the weekend, it was like shocking. And the first thing you do was like, why are you calling me on the weekend? What is, like, I reckon this could probably wait. But I don't think Karen, you and I worked together for years. We never talked on a weekend. And I certainly never called you on your holiday.
No, definitely not. You're very, very true to that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, sort of forcing yourself by creating the conditions for you to be present. And yet I want to ask again, because even when, and I have 2 children myself, and I make the decision to be fully present with them, the mind wandering happens at some stage, or we're talking about something, or we're playing something, and all of a sudden I remember that email or that task I'm yet to do and so forth. So I wonder, do you naturally, usually in your spare time, do you practice mindfulness, or what helps you with being mindful like that? Because it's a matter of practice and training the brain, isn't it? Especially in this day and age.
So I've practiced for many years. I'm not as frequent as I have been right now, but Vedic meditation or transcendental meditation. For those,
do you want to explain it a little bit?
Yeah, I've not heard of it before. You get given a mantra, a very short word, and you close your eyes, and for 20 minutes you repeat the mantra, you repeat the word. And if you get distracted and you find you're not repeating the word, you just come back to repeating the word. You don't judge yourself, you don't tell yourself off, you just come back to the word, the mantra. And yeah, I find that's rubbed off a little bit in my life of if stuff's coming in, I just sort of return to like what's the mantra in a way, but what's present for me right now. I often find as well that I have some land that I now live on in where I call home. And when I cook food, and I love cooking food for people, or when I work on my land, like literally like pruning and gardening and chopping down trees and supporting trees to grow, like I love that time because I'm doing something so different. I'm like on my land, or I'm cooking, and I can't actually think about anything else because I've got to be doing this other stuff. And I find all these like 2 hours maybe on the land, or 2 hours cooking a meal, all these thoughts just come into my head, and I kind of let them come in and I let them go out, and I get back to making the meal or working on the land. And I find it's very therapeutic to just let thoughts come in, see them and go, hi thought, and then just let it go. So yeah, maybe I've learned that from meditation.
Amazing. And then I still wonder, so it sounds like you're doing a lot of mindfulness practice, and that's like the core of mindfulness practice, isn't it? What you just described. So that's beautiful. And it's beautiful to hear that obviously that has this beautiful effect on you, which is also, obviously what we know from research that it's so effective. I still wonder a little bit about what you said earlier on in the conversation. So where you said, well, you always felt torn in all these different directions, and feeling like you let people down, because obviously there's a lot of different people or parties or business groups involved in your life, and now you very clearly made that decision that you are husband and father first and so forth. And what is difficult for me to understand is that when you have to earn the bread and butter, like, where do you make that decision that, no, now I'm, have you ever struggled with that? Thinking, no, actually, I do need to earn the money. I have to make sure I tend to the business in the first place, because otherwise I won't be able to provide. Is that ever a struggle you've experienced?
So Dave Faulkner and I sold our business a couple of years ago, and we're both working class kids. We both grew up in our high school years were spent in Western Australia, so we have that link. Neither of our families come from any money. First generation, we are, both of us, Dave and I, to go to university. So we sold our business, and to be really frank, we did well from that financially. But we worked our asses off to get there. And it was a life-changing amount of wealth. So right now, I have the freedom of financial independence. And it's about the same time, I know there's a real privilege saying this, but it's about the same time that I kind of had this big shift of, I think my children in my family are the most important thing. So there's a huge luxury there. I have the luxury of time and how I want to spend my time. And I don't have to spend my days and weeks and months working to provide for the family, because I worked my ass off for 20 years to provide for my family. So yeah, I guess the really honest answer to that is I have the luxury of time now, and it is such a privilege, and I know it's very rare, but I can do that. I can say, no, I'm not actually going to work that much at all, because if I say yes to work, I'm saying no to my children, or I'm saying no to my soul as an author. And they're far more important to me right now than work is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, and just for our listeners' sake, it's probably important to clarify here that it hasn't always been that way. It's I know that I've heard the story, like the early stages of Education Changemakers. It was a real sort of struggle, and it might be good just for our listeners just to hear a little bit about what that early stages were, or, post the pub conversation. What did that first couple of years look like?
Yeah. I was still working at the pub for a bunch of the early years. Dave took a huge pay cut and was actually had children at the time, so that was a big, and his kids were not teenagers yet; they were still in primary school. So he had to provide. He had to provide fast. But we shared shitty motel rooms in like some of Australia's roughest towns. We couldn't really pay ourselves early on, and yeah, it was. And then we were employing good people and paying them well. And there's many times where we had to take cuts ourselves, and there was fear. There was moments where we thought we might lose the business. There's a moment where we almost sold the business, and then we lost that deal because of COVID, and that was a massive hit, because we thought this is our life-changing moment right here, and then we lost it. It slipped through our hands, so we had to dust ourselves off and go again. So certainly it's a roller coaster, but that's entrepreneurship. You could ride the carousel, but riding the carousel is the same thing. It's fun the first couple of rounds, and then you go like, I've seen this before. Riding the roller coaster is a bit scarier, but more thrilling way to live.
Well, yeah, and I bet a lot of our listeners can relate to the fear you're describing too, and the roller coaster definitely, and so forth. Has there been anything that's helped you cope with the fear or the anxiety and the feeling of being on a constant roller coaster? What's gotten you through all that? Nearly selling, but then losing the contract?
Yeah, on the business side of things, it was a very close relationship with Dave Faulkner, my co-founder. Dave's still involved in the business, doing great things. So we were very close throughout the whole thing. Call each other every day. Kaitlin was my number one on my favorites. Dave was number two on favorites on my phone. So we weren't best friends in the way of, we didn't hang out on the weekends. We don't listen to the same music. We dress differently. We like different music and all sorts of different things. But once a year we'd have a dinner and we would be just so honest with each other. And there's a lot of love there, like a brotherly love. Even though we fight and bicker like brothers do as well, that Karen's been witness to. But I think, to be honest, having someone in the trenches with you is what got me through the fear and the anxiety of all those years, and meant that when we got the win, of selling the business, it was relief of like, we did it, but we did it together. And we're not even working together anymore, but there's still a lot of love there, for sure. So I think that, the secret is having a great co-founder. And I had that with Kaitlin on the nonprofit side too.
Oh no, now I'm worried about all our solopreneurs listening. I'm thinking, who can I pull into the trenches with me?
No, it's like you can go alone, but it's like one hand clapping. It's very tiring and it doesn't make a lot of noise.
And what piece of advice might you share with those people though, if they don't have a co-founder?
The advice is, it's hard with going alone. And
that's not advice.
I'd be really, really thinking about why have you not been able to attract someone as good as you are into the business? You need, like Dave was strong where I'm weak, and vice versa. We're impressed by each other. Same with Kaitlin and I. But I would be asking, like, okay, if no one else is willing to commit to this thing as much as I am, is there something wrong with this idea? Or have I just not found that person yet? Because I just think it's vital to have. Like I said, it's one hand clapping when you go alone. It's very tiring and it doesn't make as much noise.
So I'm wondering, is this your piece of advice? Don't be a solopreneur. And also, I can relate a little bit with our podcast, Karen. I mean, we've been talking about this so many times. It's so awesome to do a project like this together, because obviously, to some extent, we're both also solopreneurs. Or for me, I'm predominantly a solopreneur. And it's so nice to be able to, put heads together. Obviously, this is not a business per se, but can certainly relate. To the energy.
Yeah, I mean, the group that I'm doing some work for now is By Many. They're a great organization, and their mantra is strategy is better when it's done by many. Leadership is better when it's done by many. Companies are more powerful when they're led by many. I believe very strongly in this.
And I do know from working with you too, Aaron, that this is a big value cultural sort of like standpoint of yours, that we are better when we're together. There's a nice internal saying that sits in the Education Changemakers team around this notion of building ideas together, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I was explaining the relationship that you have with Dave to Micah prior to jumping on the call, and I said, it's complementing skill sets, right? Like that's probably the best way to think about it. Like you have very different ways of thinking, very different ways of like looking at projects. And that's probably a little bit of what led Micah and I to be in this situation too. We both had the idea that we wanted a podcast, but as more the complementing skill sets is what really brought it together and made it happen. So perhaps it's maybe been aware of, where our deficits are or areas for growth are, and finding somebody that can support us in that space. It's a really, really good one. I have one last question for you, Aaron, and I'm curious because I actually don't know the answer to this question, even after having worked with you for quite some time. You've got a breadth of knowledge and experience. I'd love for us to go like a top 3 like lessons you've learnt on your journey, from whether it be the Education Changemakers pathway, the Y-Gap pathway, or even to where you are now. What are the 3 most impactful lessons that you've learnt along your journey?
From what I brought to EC and what I brought to Y-Gap, my mantra has always been the only thing more powerful than ownership is authorship. And I didn't learn that at Cambridge University. I didn't learn that at the Defence Force Academy, where the tagline is "We train leaders." I didn't learn that in any leadership program. I learned it from a bunch of street kids in Tanzania, that the only thing more powerful than ownership is authorship. So if you let your team write the plan and write the strategy, they will own that way more than if you wrote it for them and said, hey, have some ownership over this. So the only thing more powerful than ownership is authorship, is how I build things. And you might remember lines, Karen, like, if you came to me with a question, I'd say, I don't know, you're the boss. What do you want to do? So that's huge for me. The second thing is open to change. I didn't used to be like this. I used to like winning the argument. Now I like having my mind changed, and I thank people when they change my mind. And I have open to change tattooed on my body. It's so important to me. And the third one's a more recent one, which is you always make it work. So even when I'm worried about things, I look back on my life and it's like, you always make it work, Aaron. It doesn't always end up exactly how you thought it would be, but you figure it out. So it's a kind of little pep talk I give myself. And I have this stuck on my screen at home of you always make it work. So you'll get through this, mate. Like, it's all right. Just calm down, relax. And you get woken up at 2 a.m. by thoughts. And I learned this the other day. Part of your brain that wakes up at 2 a.m. with thoughts is kind of your fight or flight. It's like Neanderthal stuff. It's like there's a tiger coming, run away. But the other part of your brain that can actually solve problems is not awake at 2 a.m. So I've learned that, like, when I wake up at 2 a.m. now and I'm like, oh shit, I've got to do this, this, and this. I give myself the license to go, you're not going to solve it at 2 a.m. because your brain is currently not working in a way that can do this. So just relax, stop thinking about it, go back to sleep. And in the morning, you'll make it work. You'll figure it out. So there are 3. Yeah, authorship, openness to change, and Aaron, you're going to make it work. You always have.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, you know, on our social media, we always share one quote from our guests. And it's like, I think we're going to have a very hard time choosing which one that's going to be for you. Beautiful pieces of advice or even mantras that I know I'm going to write down and stick onto my screen as well.
Thank you.
Aaron, it's been just an absolute honor to have you on our show and share this journey with us. It's been so nice getting to know you a little bit. Thank you so much for showing up so authentically.
Thanks, Micah. Appreciate it.
We really appreciate it. And I'm not too sure, Aaron, if there's anything on the horizon that you want to share very quickly with our audience before you race back off into your work. Anything exciting happening?
Yeah, so if pillar 1 is father and husband, pillar 2 is that author pillar, and that's how I introduce myself now. Or if people ask what I do at the pub or at a barbecue, I say I'm an author. So the latest book is a memoir. It starts on September 11, which is when I was in the military. I deployed the next day to a war, and it finishes 10 years later in an African township. And it's the story of fighter to peacemaker, boy to man. I sort of joke it's Eat, Pray, Love with guns, or it's Shantaram, Mark II. But working on that at the moment, I have an amazing editor called Alexis, and she worked on Sally Rooney's Normal People, and she worked with Nobel Prize winners and Pulitzer Prize winners. And so she's editing the book, so I'm having to let go of this book that I've written that I believe in. But that'll come out in the next few years. But in the meantime, my Instagram is Aaron J. Tait with Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, but I also have a substack called Live Deliberately, and it's my musings on how you can live a deliberate life. But yeah, if you want to follow along, they're all free channels for people to follow along, and that book will be out in the coming years. And I hope that at least one person in the world reads it and is moved by it, like I was moved by The Power of One by Bryce Courtney when I was a kid. I hope that one day someone can be moved by a book that I write.
Amazing. Thanks, Aaron. And I'm definitely keen to have a read. I've read all of your books today.
You have 2 readers right here already.
Yeah, continue to follow your Substack. So amazing. And we will pop some of the links to these in our show notes as well. But once again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you taking time to chat with us about your journey.
Absolute pleasure, and good luck with the podcast.
All right, another episode done there, Micah. And I have to admit, I really enjoyed this one because having worked with Aaron for a long time, it was kind of cool to hear a little bit more about the behind the scenes type thing that was going on, and maybe some of what influenced his decision making as a leader. Now, I'm very mindful, though, because of that, I might be carrying a little bit of bias into this conversation. So before I jump straight into things here, I'd love to know what your thoughts were, and then I can maybe share something that surprised me a little bit that I sort of discovered through the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I also adored the chat, and it's just always, I'm so in awe of people who manage to create businesses like these. And obviously he hasn't just created one business, but several, and, sold very big as well. And then also, though, he has this family and a really nice life now by the sounds of it. So that's just incredible. One thing that stuck with me that he mentioned was authorship is bigger than ownership. And it sort of took me a minute to think about that. What does that really mean? And then I thought, isn't that so perfect how it fits exactly into what we talk about all the time with flourishing, really? That, the act of creating and contributing original ideas or realizing your potential and expressing yourself holds so much more value and significance than simply, possessing or controlling, the outcome or accumulating wealth or anything like that. What did you think of that? Was that the first time you heard him say that, or is it like he says
most
all
definitely,
the time?
most definitely not the first time I heard him say that. It's definitely a bit of a mantra that was sort of like, sat within the team when I was working with Aaron, and he was quite great at sort of really bringing that to the forefront of our minds. And it was interesting because Aaron would often challenge us and our team to think a little bit differently and encourage other people's thinking, different perspectives, that the notion of like holding our ideas lightly so we would have that willingness to learn a little bit more. So definitely not the first time I heard it, but it is definitely a mantra that I have come to love over the years.
Interesting. And I'm also interested to hear, though, how all of this compares to how you've experienced working with him. He spoke about, really protecting his time and stuff like that. And I do wonder what that looks like from behind the scenes. How have you experienced that from, the perspective of working with him?
Yeah, and look, Aaron is very true to his words here. He was very big on protecting time for when he switched off from work. And I love this because, I think that when you have a leader that models, great desirable behaviors and healthy habits like that, it encourages the rest of the team to sort of follow suit. So when it was switch off time, it was switch off time. And that, as somebody who was working for, a leader that did this, meant that I felt as though I had permission to do the same thing as well. So I think, for our listeners, if we're in charge and, we've got people in our stead, it's great to sort of model healthy behaviors so that our team can also feel as though they have that permission. That was incredibly powerful in working with Aaron, and still to this day I keep that in the forefront of my mind, that switch off time, and removing notifications off my phone that relate to work was really important in helping me sort of detach from work. I mean, I think your messages from you, Michael, might be the only work-related things that I get through after hours now, just because we tend
all the time. Sorry.
I mean, and it goes both ways, but I must admit they're very energising conversations, so I don't mind.
Should we share some? No.
Yeah, but yeah, I know. I know what your thoughts were on that as well, but when I do think of leadership, it is important to model the behaviours that we want our teams to feel as though they should have as well. It's that notion of leading by example, but also to Aaron's point, and to back to an earlier episode in the season, I think back to Greg Lacey, who was talking about leading authentically. Aaron's really authentic with this approach, and it was really felt as well. He put his heart and soul into the task that was at hand. And when the task was done, the day was done, and it was on to where my energy next needs to go.
That's fantastic. I love the whole idea of working outcomes based rather than sort of time based. I think we have such a long way to go with organizations who still pay an hourly rate, and you have to do the hours, or you have to be in the office for certain hours. And, you see then workers stretch it out. They could get this task done way earlier if they knew if the task is done properly at a certain stage, and then afterwards they can go home. They would get it done so much quicker and probably so much better too. But what you said before in terms of role modeling, absolutely 100% agree. We see this all the time, and we know from research how important it is. And, I used to work in behavior change programs in organizations as well. It's so important, not just to get buy-in and communicate the message throughout all the levels and from high up, but also to have that role modeling from management and leadership. So 100% agree with that.
It falls so nicely into that notion, like all that literature, that body of literature that sits around like positive organizational behaviors, right? Like there's so much to be said around, modeling healthy habits to our teams. Sorry, I feel like I was about to cut you. I feel like I cut you off there. I feel as though you had a... No? Okay, great.
No, not at all. And I also think, it highlights or emphasizes again the importance of authenticity, because if you send out a message but you don't live it yourself, no one's going to believe it. No one's going to follow your message or your prompt or whatever. So, 100% agree. Something else that I thought was really interesting that he spoke about was around, first of all the struggles he experienced with his startups, especially in the beginning. Wow, it just felt like back to uni days, except he's done this past uni, and for a long time it just sounded really, really tough. In terms of the struggles you had living on minimum wages or barely any wages, staying in dodgy motels, the amount of travel they had to do. And just know from, some stats out there that failure rates amongst startups are so huge, or they accumulate all this debt. They don't really earn anything. It has huge detrimental impacts on their mental health. It is such a tough gig, isn't it? It's so important people know exactly what they're in for and also why they're doing what they're doing. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's a real moral purpose piece behind the work that Aaron was doing that really drove him. If you sat down, if we were sitting down having that conversation with Aaron in the pub, where the original idea came from, it's beautiful to think that maybe that's where some of the best ideas stem from. Which I think for both of us found a little bit of comfort in that. Knowing that could be the next thing that helps get a big idea up and going. But
so I'm going to the pub on the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. That's where all our business meetings are going to be held from here on in. But I think at the end of the day, like Aaron's very big on social impact, and I think that when that conversation first was had, that was still at the forefront of his mind. He probably wouldn't have jumped into this venture if he didn't feel as though there was a social aspect side to the work that was going to be undertaken. So, bringing it back to our moral purpose was, and that's been a regular theme throughout the season, hasn't it? Lots of people talking about the why, and I invest in this because I'm really passionate about it, and that's something that I'm good at and I really enjoy. And I think and Aaron's just another example of a business leader that really sticks quite true to his moral purpose.
Agree. And the other thing I guess that struck me too was the whole idea of co-founding a business. He said a couple of times, like, don't do it alone, go in with a co-founder. That's what got him through. And I was thinking to myself, hang on a minute, I'm a solopreneur. What does that mean for me? But also, obviously, I could relate with our podcast, having done it together, and all the advantages that come with that. We have two brains, we have complementing skill sets. It's like if there's a low, if something doesn't go according to plan, you still, can cheer each other up, or, shared costs, for goodness sake, can really relate to that. That really spoke to me and really made me think, if I were to create maybe a startup at some stage or turn this business into something else, more like a service-based business, again, from an organizational standpoint, I probably, based on this conversation, would not choose to do it on my own.
And you're right. Like the podcast for us is a great example of this, right? Like we our early conversations were like, oh yeah, I'm interested. I think I could do it. And then the more we talked, the more we realized how much was involved. And then we were like, oh, but I can do this part. Oh, do you think you could do that part? And you know, you're right. The complementing skill sets definitely make things easier. But also along the way, like, it hasn't been a smooth. You know, we haven't really spoken too much about our journey in the, you know, as a podcast and development podcast. But it hasn't been super smooth sailing the whole way. And at times we're working late to try and like, you know, go through the editing process, or we're like, you know, developing copy. I mean, you're developing copy. That's definitely not my strong point. But, you know, like there's been times that we've had to sort of bounce off of each other and bring our energy back up. And that definitely helps, having somebody else that sort of understands where you're at and what you're going through as well. So
totally. And also someone else just saying thank you, because I know exactly what you're going through right now and I appreciate it, is like, that's, you know, what got me through so many times. So yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and I guess, again, sort of research really underpins this. You know, it shows that co-founders or startups that are based on 2 co-founders at least have a much higher success rate. So they accumulate a lot more funding, or they just have a 30% success rate. It really is like 1 + 1 = 3 when it comes to co-founding a business. And I really like that.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? But also not surprising at the same time, right?
No, not
and
really.
For some of our listeners, that might be a little bit challenging because you're sort of in that sphere of going, ooh, where do I go from here? But it was just, you know, it's another perspective, right? And I think that's a really valuable part of the conversations that we have here. They just offer differing perspectives on different topics. So
absolutely.
I
and you know, if you're listening and you don't have a co-founder per se in your business, I mean, this is very much about social support and support networks. You know, whether it's like finding yourself a mastermind, a mentor, you know, a group of maybe entrepreneurial friends who you hang out with, or something like that. There are some other avenues to support yourself and fill some of those gaps. So I would hate for people to listen to this and feel really discouraged. I was actually hoping for the opposite.
Yes, absolutely. That's definitely what we're aiming for in each of our episodes here, and I think that's a nice timely little reminder there too, as we sort of look to wrap things up here. Unless you had anything else that you wanted to mention in this conversation, but
well, not really, but can you believe we're almost at the end of this season, our very first season? And I was wondering whether we should give some teasers for our last guest, which is not an insignificant person.
Yeah, totally fair. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think we've sort of had a bit of a theme of giving away a few little hints, and we might as well. It's our second last episode here for this season, so probably great for our listeners to know a little bit about who's to come. We haven't spoken exactly about what you're going to mention here, so I'm very curious to know what you might be willing to share.
I know.
What can you tell our listeners about our final guest?
Huge fitness influencer, global, super inspiring person. Okay, we'd probably say that about everybody. Can I say she? I'm just going to say she is also an aspiring psychologist. Has her own podcast too. Has worked with big people in the past. Can I mention David Beckham?
That's fair. That's fair. Oh, that was clever. Yep. Not to give away too much,
But she's so nice. She's so nice. She's so approachable. She's so down to earth. Love her. And I know our listeners are going to love that chat.
Indeed, yeah. Look, I think that you've done a pretty good job there, not giving away too much. But hopefully it's enough to keep people intrigued as to who it might be. Stay tuned, because it's only a short time before you get to see all of the bits and pieces come out on social media. I'll let you know who it is. But as we get towards the end of the season, it's just a nice little time to say thank you for the support along the way. Lots of people have left comments and reviews, which has been so beautiful and uplifting for us. So thank you for those.
Thank you, if that was you.
Yeah, indeed. And if you haven't already, we'd love to see some nice comments there or reviews, and feel free to reach out to us too if there's anything that you'd like to chat about, or somebody who you think might be a great guest for the show. We're always on the lookout for new talent and great conversations.
Well said, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. But for now, thank you all for joining us and listening to another episode. Stay tuned, one last episode for the season. Take care, look after yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's show. We hope our conversation helped normalize the struggles so many of us face on the path to success. While on the outside things often look like sunshine and rainbows, this is rarely the experience for anyone behind the facade.
But instead of letting that demotivate you, we hope it does the exact opposite, to let it fuel you to keep pursuing your purpose and realize your potential. Just without the added burden of feeling inadequate, and a little more patience, some tips, and self-compassion instead. For further info, head to our website, flourishingunfiltered.com, and get in touch with us via our socials, @flourishingunfiltered.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of loneliness, low mental health, or suicidal thoughts, please know that there are people who care and treatments that can help. We've compiled some helplines for you in the show notes.
It's a wrap for Flourishing Unfiltered today. Please give us a follow and leave us a comment and a review. We hope you tune in next time.